Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Garden of Lost Echoes, Keeper of the Forgotten. Act 1, The Forgotten Gate. The gentle hum of early spring lingered in the air as Lyra stepped out of the stone archway at the back of the main library. She had visited the building hundreds of times, but today was different. There was no real reason for her feet to carry her this way, no book to return, no appointment to attend. Just a strange pull in her chest, like a quiet thread of longing tugging her forward. The sun filtered down through the early blooming branches of hawthorn trees that flanked the rear courtyard, bathing everything in a soft, golden light. Lyra let her fingers brush the rough stone wall as she walked along its edge. The library was old, centuries old, and everyone in town said it held more secrets than books. But Lyra didn't come here for stories in ink and paper. Not today. She rounded a corner past a row of forgotten benches, half buried under ivy and moss. And that's when she saw it. Hidden behind a thick wall of flowering lavender shrubs stood a rusted wrought iron gate. Its bars were twined with vines so thick and tangled they nearly hid the metal entirely. Only the shimmer of iron glinting through the green gave it away. Lyra stopped in her tracks. She tilted her head. How had she never noticed it before? She'd explored nearly every corner of this part of the grounds during her many lunchtime escapes and late afternoon walks. Yet somehow, this gate had evaded her entirely. As she moved closer, a sudden gust of wind lifted the edges of her coat and carried the scent of lavender and fresh earth to her nose. She hesitated, staring at the gate. A part of her whispered to turn back, to leave it be. But a louder part, curious, hungry, urged her onward. Brushing the lavender branches aside, Lyra stepped up to the gate. It creaked softly as she pressed one hand against it, flakes of rust brushing off onto her palm. The latch was old, but not locked. It clicked open with surprising ease. She pushed. The gate groaned like something long asleep being roused from slumber. On the other side was a narrow, moss-covered path that led into a hidden grove. Sunlight danced through the leaves in delicate speckles, and the air felt different. Still. Watchful. Not eerie, more like the garden was holding its breath. Lyra stepped through. The path curved and rose slightly, leading her past crumbling stone walls and tangled vines. There were birdsong and distant chimes on the breeze, though she saw no wind chimes, no birds. Just the sound, as if the place itself remembered music. As she rounded the final bend of the path, the grove opened into a clearing unlike anything she'd expected. A circular stone courtyard lay nestled among flowering trees, magnolia, wisteria, dogwood, all blooming out of season. A single stone bench sat at the center, facing an overgrown wall with something carved into its surface. At its base was a wooden box, aged and weather-beaten, with a faded green ribbon tied around it. Lyra felt a shiver run through her. She slowly approached the bench, heart thudding in her chest, not with fear, but anticipation. There was something sacred about this place, as though it had been waiting for her. As if it remembered footsteps long since faded. She sat down. For a while, she said nothing. Did nothing. Just listened. The wind made a gentle rustling in the leaves, and every so often, the chimes returned. Then, carefully, she reached for the wooden box. The ribbon came away in a single pull. Inside, she found papers thin, yellowed with age, covered in looping ink handwriting. There were poems, letters, fragments of stories. Some were signed with names. Others with initials. One had a tiny pressed flower still tucked into its fold. They were notes from people who had come here before her. Lyra's hands trembled as she turned over the pages, reading snatches of thoughts. I found this place by accident, or maybe it found me. He never answered my last letter, but I come here anyway, hoping. And the garden listens. I think it hears us when no one else can. She wasn't alone. Not now. Not ever. Whatever this place was, a hidden garden, a memory held in stone and rooted, had held others too. Others who had sought solace, beauty, and the quiet space between moments. Lyra leaned back against the bench, pressing the pages to her chest. And for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not by people, but by the space itself. As though the garden had accepted her as one of its own. And just as the sun began to dip low behind the wall of trees, casting amber light across the stone floor, she whispered softly, "I'll be back tomorrow." Act 2, Whispers Beneath the Ivy. Lyra returned the very next day, just as she'd promised. The morning mist still lingered on the library's stone steps as she passed through the rear courtyard, her footsteps soft and certain. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her hands moved past the lavender shrubs like she had done it 100 times before, and the hidden gate welcomed her with a slow, groaning swing. Sunlight filtered through in long shafts of gold, warming the mossy ground. The garden hadn't changed. It was still frozen in that strange, timeless bloom, as if each tree was suspended between seasons, half spring, half memory. She retraced her steps to the stone bench, where the wooden box still waited. Nothing had been disturbed. As she sat and opened the lid once more, a soft breeze stirred the leaves. A single page, which she didn't recall seeing the day before, fluttered loose and landed near her feet. Curious, Lyra picked it up. It wasn't like the others. This note was dated not from decades ago, like the others, but only a few months back. The handwriting was different too, bold, angular, and a little rushed. To whoever finds this next. I came here chasing echoes. I heard stories about this garden growing from whispers. I didn't believe them. Until I started hearing the voices. Lyra blinked. Voices. She scanned the rest of the page. It spoke of a dreamlike encounter of walking into the grove and hearing someone call her name. The note's author never found the source, only that every time they returned, the voice was closer. Goosebumps prickled her arms despite the warm sun. Was it just a metaphor? A poetic flourish? She tucked the note back inside the box, along with the others, and leaned back against the cold stone bench. The sound of the wind in the leaves had a rhythm to it now, soft, but deliberate, almost like words. She closed her eyes. For a few minutes, she just listened. And then she heard it. Not quite a voice. Not clearly. But a tone. A vibration low and musical, carried on the wind like a distant song sung underwater. It came and went like a dream, leaving her unsure whether it had ever really been there. Lyra opened her eyes and looked around the clearing again. Something on the far wall, previously just a blur of ivy and weather-worn stone, caught her attention now. She stood and crossed to it. As she pulled the ivy aside, an inscription revealed itself. Faded letters, carved into the stone in a flowing script, barely legible. Those who leave their words may find them answered in time. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a garden. It was a conversation. A place where thoughts left behind somehow spoke back. She turned to the wooden box again, and an idea stirred in her chest. She reached into her bag for a small notebook and a pen. She hesitated only a moment before writing. If you're still listening. I'm Lyra. I found this place by accident. But it feels like it knew I was coming. Who are you? She folded the note carefully and placed it at the top of the box. For the next hour, Lyra wandered through the garden. She found a stone stairway partially covered in vines, leading downward into a shaded nook with crumbling stone columns. Wildflowers pushed up through the cracks in the steps, and at the base of one column was a small carving, an emblem shaped like a key. A symbol. A sign. There was something more here. Something layered beneath the surface. Not just memories, but perhaps stories that had never been finished. Voices that had waited far too long for someone to hear them. She traced the symbol with one fingertip and whispered, "What are you trying to tell me?" And for a moment, the wind didn't answer with silence. It answered with rustling, rhythmic words. Almost like someone repeating her name. Act 3, The Key in the Stone. By the third visit, Lyra no longer felt like a stranger to the garden. The wrought iron gate no longer groaned when she opened it, as if it too had accepted her presence. The path of moss and dappled sunlight welcomed her like a memory she hadn't lived yet. She carried with her a small satchel, today notebooks, a thermos of tea, and a velvet pouch she couldn't explain why she had brought. Just instinct. As she entered the clearing, the garden sounds seemed to shift. The chimes she had heard before no longer came from nowhere. She now saw them delicate metal strands hanging from the branches of an old ash tree. They shimmered with faint color, as if the light passing through them remembered rainbows. The wooden box was still on the bench, but something was different. Tucked beside it, half hidden under a maple leaf, was a folded piece of parchment. Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. To Lyra. You asked who I am. I'm not sure anymore. But I know you found the stone key. If it called to you, then you're already part of the story. Keep listening. The garden will guide you. Eat. Her breath hitched. Someone had read her note. Someone had written back. And they knew about the carving. The key in the stone. She looked over her shoulder toward the staircase wrapped in vines, the one she had found the day before. She moved quickly now, guided by an urgency she couldn't quite name. The light shifted as clouds drifted above, casting long shadows across the stone steps. At the base of the column, the key-shaped emblem still remained unchanged, yet suddenly more alive. Kneeling before it, Lyra pressed her fingers against the outline. There was a click. The stone beneath the carving trembled slightly, and a small panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment within the pillar. Dust rose into the air as she pulled something from the hollow. It was a key. Not stone. Real. Old, bronze, and warm in her hand despite the cool air. A ribbon trailed from its end, faded green, like the one tied to the wooden box. She stared at it, then glanced around the garden. The wind had died. The garden was holding its breath again. What are you? She whispered. No answer came this time, but the silence seemed thoughtful, not indifferent. She slipped the key into the velvet pouch she'd brought. Perhaps some part of her had known she would need it, and sat back down on the stone bench. The garden felt denser now, not darker, but fuller, like it had pulled its stories in close. She opened her notebook and began to write. Day 3. Someone answered me. Their name or letter is E. They knew about the carving. About the key. This garden is alive with memory. I don't think it forgets anyone. I don't know who E is, but I think they were like me. I think they needed to be heard. Maybe that's why we're all drawn here. She closed her notebook gently. As she sipped her tea, a memory stirred within her, unbidden and buried deep. A time, years ago, when she had lost someone. When no one had understood her silence. When she had tried to write her grief into poems no one would read. The garden had listened. Even before she found it, it had been waiting. And now, with a key in her pocket and someone whispering from the past, she had the feeling that her story, whatever it truly was only beginning. Act 4, The Door Behind the Wall. The next morning, the skies were overcast with clouds that moved slowly, as if the world itself had become contemplative. Lyra stood at the threshold of the hidden gate, the bronze key nestled safely in her pocket, warm like a secret against her fingertips. She had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the winding vines, the glint of the key, the note signed with only a single letter, E. And a question had anchored itself in her chest like a stone dropped into deep water. What was this place truly? As she stepped through the iron gate once more, something felt different. The garden was quieter. Not silent, exactly, but reverent. As if the trees and stones had agreed to step back, just enough, so she might walk more freely through their memory. She returned first to the stone pillar, sliding her fingers across the hollow space that had given her the key. It was empty now, just a cold crevice in time. But she whispered a quiet thank you, just in case. Then she wandered further this time. Deeper. Beyond the clearing, beyond the old ash tree with its rainbow chimes, there was another path, one she hadn't seen before. It wasn't marked. Not with stones or signs. Just the way the branches leaned slightly apart, like arms opening wide. The ground beneath her feet was different too. Instead of moss, it was paved with square tiles, some cracked, others covered in creeping vines. She followed them until she reached a stone wall, wrapped thick in ivy, so dense it looked like a green curtain. And then, something shimmered. There. A seam barely visible, running down the center of the wall. A door. Her breath caught. Lyra stepped forward and pulled aside the ivy. Beneath it, the outline of a wooden door revealed itself, its frame nestled into the old stone. A small bronze plate was set in its center. No handle. Just a keyhole, etched into the metal. She didn't hesitate. From the pouch at her hip, she withdrew the key and slid it in. It turned smoothly. With a slow click, the door opened inward, exhaling a scent of cedarwood and rain-damp paper. Inside, everything was still. The room was small, more of a study than anything else. Wooden shelves curved along the walls, filled with notebooks, letters, maps, and old books whose spines bore no titles. A small writing desk sat at the far end, beneath a round stained glass window that filtered soft, golden light onto the floor. And sitting on the desk, as if left there only yesterday, was another letter. Lyra. I knew someone would come. The garden always finds those who are ready. This was my sanctuary. I was once like you, curious, lost, and unsure why I felt drawn here. But the garden taught me how to listen, to remember, and eventually, to leave. If you are here, then it is your turn now. The garden has chosen you. Evelyn. Lyra sat slowly in the chair by the desk, her heart a storm of realization. Evelyn. Not just a random letter. A name. A person who had been here. Lived here. Learned here. She looked around the room, feeling the energy of every book, every folded note, every tucked away memory that had survived time through care and silence. It was a sanctuary. A memory room. A seat of the past. She took a breath and turned her eyes to the desk drawers. One by one, she opened them. Inside were scraps of notes, maps of the garden, some hand-drawn with paths that curved into spirals and hidden alcoves. There were pressed flowers, each labeled with a date. One had a note. April 12th. The garden bloomed for someone new today. Lyra smiled. Evelyn had been keeping track. Not just of plants, but of people. Of every person who had found the gate. Who had left a note. Who had needed the garden. A single book, bound in dark leather, sat in a drawer of its own. The title was engraved faintly on the cover in gold. Those who listened. Lyra opened it. Inside were pages and pages of names, dates, short entries. Sometimes only a sentence. I miss her laugh. He said he loved me, but only here. I never told them goodbye. This place remembers when I cannot. Each one like a heartbeat. Some were signed. Others anonymous. But they were all echoes left behind, floating in the stillness of this secret room. Lyra's chest ached with the weight of their truths. And with the quiet joy of knowing they had been kept, not discarded. Heard, not forgotten. She pulled out her notebook, turned to a blank page, and began to write, not just for herself anymore, but for the room, for the garden, for Evelyn. April 13th. I found a door. I found Evelyn. I'm not sure what happens next. But I think I'm ready to listen too. If you come after me, know this. The garden listens. And so will I. She set the notebook beside Evelyn's letter and closed the drawer softly. Outside, the chimes swayed in a new rhythm. Something had changed. Something had begun. Act 5, Dreams Beneath the Magnolia Tree. The next day, Lyra didn't rush to the garden. She prepared. She packed more deliberately an extra notebook, her favorite fountain pen, a thermos of chamomile tea, and a small blanket. The air carried the kind of crispness that hinted at spring tipping toward early summer, but the light still held that golden hush of change. This time, she didn't go straight to the hidden door. Instead, she sat beneath the magnolia tree in the main clearing. Its branches swayed gently above her, and large white blossoms floated down like folded paper wishes. The stone bench felt warmer now, as if it remembered her. She opened her notebook, rereading her last entry, the one she'd written in Evelyn's sanctuary. Her fingers hovered above the page, unsure where to go next. And then, she felt it. A pull. Not on her body but her mind. A sudden wave of sleepiness, like the garden was draping a soft veil over her thoughts. The breeze became slower. The chimes distant. Time stilled. And before she could resist, her eyes fluttered shut. She dreamed. But this was no ordinary dream. In it, the garden remained but changed. Older. Wilder. The trees were taller, their roots reaching out like veins across the soil. Lanterns hung from branches, glowing softly like fireflies. And standing beneath the magnolia tree was a woman in a deep green cloak, her back to Lyra. Evelyn. Lyra's voice echoed strangely in the air, distant yet clear. The woman turned. Her face was calm, kind. Lines of quiet knowledge traced the edges of her eyes. She didn't look surprised to see Lyra. In fact, she smiled as though she'd been waiting. "You heard it, didn't you?" Evelyn said softly. "The garden speaks in more than words." Lyra took a step forward. She wasn't sure if her feet moved or if the dream shifted around her. Either way, she felt anchored and completely adrift. "Why me?" she asked. "Why now?" Evelyn's gaze drifted upward, toward the canopy of blossoms. "Because silence grows heavy without listeners. This place is memory and memory seeks to be shared. I tended this garden. You will too, in your own way." Lyra wanted to ask what that meant. What she was supposed to do. But Evelyn was already fading, her form dissolving like morning mist. "Return to the room," Evelyn whispered. "And listen for the name." The world shivered. Lyra woke with a start, breath catching in her throat. The wind had picked up. Petals from the magnolia tree spun around her in wild, whirling spirals. The sun had dipped lower. She must have slept for nearly an hour. But the most surprising thing. A new letter sat beside her. She hadn't brought any with her. She hadn't seen or heard anyone approach. Yet there it was, cream paper, folded precisely, her name written on the front in dark ink. With trembling hands, she opened it. "Lyra. She showed herself to you, didn't she? I saw her once, too. In a dream beneath the willow tree. She comes when we're ready. Return to the sanctuary. There's something there for you now. Eat." Lyra stood, heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. She crossed the clearing quickly, taking the winding path back to the ivy-covered door. The bronze key slid into the lock with practiced ease, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room had changed. A second book now rested on the desk. Smaller. Bound in soft blue leather. No title. She opened it. The first page was blank, but the second held a single sentence. To name a garden is to know its soul. Beneath it, a list. Each line was a name, handwritten in different styles. Some crossed out. some followed by dates. Others, left open. Her name wasn't there yet. Lyra flipped through more pages. There were stories brief but vivid of others who had once walked the moss path, who had found a key, who had written letters to the wind. Each person had heard something different. Some heard voices. Others saw light. A few felt the earth shift beneath their feet. But they had all come to the same place. The same gate. The same garden. And now it was Lyra's turn. She turned to the last page. It was blank. She set her pen against the paper and, without fully knowing why, wrote, "My name is Lyra. I do not yet know the garden's name. But I know it breathes. I know it remembers. I know it chose me." She closed the book and let out a breath. The air in the room felt charged, expectant. She looked around at Evelyn's old maps, the pressed flowers, the letters, and the stained glass light. And she realized something. She was no longer just a visitor. She was part of the story now. And the garden was beginning to write back. Act 6, The Sound of the Garden's Heart. The following day, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed subtly, but unmistakably. The garden, which had once felt like a quiet, secret place, now felt alive. Not just in the way plants grew or the wind blew, but in a deeper sense. The very air hummed with possibility, as if every leaf and stone were holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for her. It was late afternoon when it happened. She had spent hours wandering the garden, retracing familiar paths, letting her hands brush against the ancient bark of trees, the cool stone of walls, the soft petals of flowers. She felt drawn to places she had never visited before, to corners of the garden she hadn't noticed in her previous visits. She found herself standing in front of a willow tree at the far end of the garden. The massive, sweeping branches drooped low, their silver-green leaves swaying in the breeze, as if beckoning her closer. She had seen this tree before, but today, it felt different. Almost as if it recognized her. Lyra stepped closer, and that's when she heard it. A sound. Faint, like the whisper of silk sliding across stone. Her heart skipped a beat. The sound was distant but clear, carried by the wind, a soft, melodic hum, like someone singing far away. A melody without words, but one that seemed oddly familiar, as if it had always been there, waiting for her to notice. She stood frozen, trying to catch the notes, trying to follow the tune. It was coming from somewhere near the heart of the garden, from deeper within the willow's boughs, from behind the thick curtain of hanging branches. Lyra couldn't resist. She pushed through the weeping branches, parting them with both hands. The cool air inside was different, darker, quieter, as if she had stepped into another world. The space beneath the willow tree was like a small hidden room, its floor covered in soft moss and flowers that bloomed with vibrant color. In the center of the room, at the base of the tree's trunk, was a small stone platform. Upon it lay an intricately carved box, covered in ivy and almost completely hidden from view. The melody was louder now, and she could hear it clearly. It was coming from the box. It was a lullaby. Lyra's hands trembled as she knelt before the stone box, its surface warm to the touch. She hesitated only for a moment before gently lifting the lid. Inside was a bundle of folded cloth. She carefully unwrapped it to reveal an old, weathered music box. It was beautiful carved wood with delicate silver filigree, small and delicate, yet it radiated an undeniable weight of history. The music had stopped. Lyra sat back on her heels, holding the music box in her hands. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of earth and flowers that seemed to fill the air beneath the willow's boughs. Then, with a soft click, she wound the key on the side of the box. The melody began again. This time, the tune was different. Clearer. It was as though the box itself had somehow remembered her, its notes tracing the contours of her soul. It was the same lullaby she had heard when she first arrived, but now it felt more personal, more intimate, like a message hidden in the music, waiting for her to unlock it. As the music played, a strange sensation washed over her. It was as if the very air around her had thickened, as if time itself had slowed down. The breeze that rustled the willow leaves became still. The garden seemed to hold its breath once again, and for a moment, everything was suspended in time. Then, just as the final note of the lullaby lingered in the air, a new sound broke through the silence. A voice. Soft. Clear. Familiar, yet not quite. Lyra. She froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the garden. It was a voice alive, breathing. Her name spoken with such tenderness, as if the garden itself had taken on the voice of someone long past. The sound came from behind her. Lyra slowly turned, her heart pounding. But there was no one there. Only the willow tree, its branches swaying lightly in the breeze. She took a step back, her pulse racing. Was she imagining it? Or had the garden truly spoken to her, as Evelyn had said it would? She stared at the music box in her hands, then glanced around the space beneath the tree. She had heard it, hadn't she? That voice. And then, as if guided by some unseen force, her eyes fell upon something she had missed before. In the far corner of the space, partially hidden beneath a thick blanket of ivy, was another stone, this one large and round, with strange markings carved deeply into its surface. The symbols were unfamiliar, but something about them felt important. Lyra stepped forward, drawn to the stone. She reached down, brushing aside the ivy that clung to it, and traced the markings with her fingers. They were warm, almost as though the stone itself was alive. And then she understood. This was the key. The garden had been waiting for her to find it, waiting for her to unlock its secrets. This stone, this symbol, was the garden's heart, the place where all its memories were stored, where everything came together. The markings on the stone were a language she didn't recognize, but somehow, she knew what they meant. It was the name of the garden. Not a name in the traditional sense, but a name that resonated through time, through memory, through the very soil beneath her feet. Lyra whispered it aloud, her voice barely a breath. The Garden of Lost Echoes. The moment the words left her lips, a wave of energy rushed through the garden. The air crackled with life, the trees around her swaying as if they were awakening from a long slumber. The music box's final note lingered in the air, vibrating with something ancient, something powerful. Lyra stood there, breathless, as the garden seemed to breathe with her. She had found it. She had found the garden's name. And in that moment, everything changed. Act 7, The Echoes of the Past. Lyra stood beneath the willow tree, her fingers still tingling from the warmth of the stone. The words she had spoken, the name of the garden, the name that echoed through time, felt both like a revelation and a burden. The Garden of Lost Echoes. She whispered the name once more, testing its weight on her tongue. It was an ancient name, filled with the residue of countless souls, lost and found. The garden hummed softly around her, as if it, too, was processing the name, embracing it. The music box had stopped, its last note lingering like the trace of a dream fading upon waking. She stood there, still, her heart beating in sync with the rhythm of the wind. The voice that had called her name was gone now, but the connection she felt to the garden was stronger than ever. As the light began to wane and the sun dipped lower behind the trees, Lyra made her way back to the stone bench near the clearing. The evening air was crisp, cool against her skin, and the quiet rhythm of the garden seemed to pulse in her veins. She felt as if she were part of something far larger than herself, a thread woven into the tapestry of time, binding her to those who had walked here before. When she sat down on the bench, the world around her shifted. The shadows stretched longer, the rustling leaves whispered more insistently, and the distant chimes began their song again, but this time, it was different. It was no longer just wind, no longer just the melody of the garden. There was something else, something personal, something that belonged to the garden itself, and to her. Lyra closed her eyes, leaning back against the stone. The air thickened, and a single word seemed to drift on the breeze. Not spoken, but felt. Listen. It was the same word she had heard in the dream beneath the magnolia tree. The same voice, soft and familiar, yet distant. It was Evelyn. She was calling to her. This time, Lyra didn't resist. She stood, moving toward the edge of the garden where the dense thicket of ivy and moss had once hidden the hidden door. As she passed through the iron gate, a strange feeling of anticipation surged through her. The garden was alive with whispers, not just the wind or the rustling of leaves, but voices, soft, as though the very earth were speaking to her. She followed the winding path back to the stone pillar, the place where the key had been found, and where Evelyn's legacy had begun to unfold. The air seemed to shift, heavy with unseen presence. She walked deeper into the garden, past the stone walls and ivy-clad pathways, until she reached a secluded area she had never seen before. There, in a small clearing, lay another stone circle. This one was different. The stones were darker, smoother, almost polished, with strange markings etched deep into their surfaces. Lyra stepped forward, drawn to the center, where another stone tablet lay similar to the one she had discovered beneath the willow tree. Her fingers brushed the surface of the stone, and instantly, the markings shifted, glowing faintly under her touch. She could see the outline of a name familiar yet alien. The letters seemed to form as if they were being written just for her. She read the name aloud. Evelyn. The moment she spoke it, the ground beneath her trembled. The garden's energy surged in a way she had never felt before. The trees seemed to sway in a different rhythm, the chimes rang with a new intensity, and the wind picked up, carrying whispers from all directions. Evelyn. Lyra closed her eyes and held her breath. When she opened them again, the air around her had changed. There, standing before her, was a figure. Faint at first, like a silhouette in a dream, but as the seconds passed, the figure became clearer, more solid. It was Evelyn. She was dressed in the same green cloak, her face serene, her eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. "You've come," Evelyn said, her voice like the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. "You've unlocked it?" Lyra's voice caught in her throat. She felt as though she were standing in the presence of something ancient, something vast. The garden had come to life before her eyes, its spirit embodied in this woman who had once tended it. "I don't understand," Lyra whispered. "What do you mean?" Evelyn smiled, her eyes glinting with understanding. She gestured to the garden around them, the stone tablet at their feet, and the swirling wind that now seemed to dance in perfect harmony. "This place," Evelyn began softly, "was always more than just a garden. It is a sanctuary for lost souls, not just those who have passed, but those who have been forgotten by time. It was built to listen to them, to remember them. It is a keeper of stories, of names, of memories." Lyra's breath quickened. Her heart pounded in her chest as she felt the weight of Evelyn's words settle over her. The realization hit her like a wave. She wasn't just here to discover the garden's secrets, she was here to become part of its story, to carry its memory forward. "But why me?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. "Why did the garden choose me?" Evelyn's smile softened. "Because you are ready. You have listened. You have felt the heartbeat of the garden, the pulse of its memories. The garden chooses those who will carry its stories, who will protect them. You, Lyra, are now part of its name." Lyra stood in silence, her thoughts racing. "But I don't know what to do," she said quietly. Evelyn's gaze was steady, filled with quiet assurance. "You already know," she replied. "You will listen. You will remember. And when the time comes, you will share the stories." With that, Evelyn began to fade, her figure dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The garden around Lyra shifted, its colors deepening, its sounds fading into a peaceful stillness. Lyra stood alone, the weight of Evelyn's words heavy in her chest. The garden had chosen her. It had entrusted her with its secrets. And now, it was time for her to listen. Act 8, The Garden's Keeper. The days that followed were heavier, yet somehow lighter. It was as though the garden itself had whispered its weight into her soul, but in return, it had also gifted her with an understanding, a clarity that was both humbling and terrifying. Lyra moved through the garden with purpose now, her steps no longer tentative. Each stone, each tree, each rustling leaf seemed to call to her, urging her onward. It was as though the garden had known her all along, even before she'd arrived, and now she was learning how to listen. But the garden was not the only thing changing. Lyra felt it in herself, too, the quiet, inexplicable pull of something deep within her. A part of her that she had never fully understood, but now seemed to awaken with every step she took, every note of the lullaby she wound in the music box, every whispered name carried on the wind. The secret world of the garden was beginning to stretch beyond its gates. There were moments when the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the mossy path, when the chimes began to sing that she would feel it, a beckoning. A reminder that this was no ordinary garden, no mere escape from the world. It was a threshold, a door to the forgotten past, and Lyra was its keeper. But what did that mean? She had already learned to listen. She had already become a part of the garden's story. And now, as she walked deeper into the heart of its memory, she was faced with something far more difficult than merely observing. She was being asked to make a choice, to keep the garden's stories safe within its walls, as they had been for centuries, or to share them with the world beyond. The thought was as both comforting and terrifying as standing at the edge of a cliff. The stories of the garden were fragile like old leaves, brittle and delicate, waiting to be swept away by the winds of time. Once shared, they could never be taken back. But could she really keep them hidden forever? Could she, in good conscience, let the voices of the lost souls fade into silence once again? After all, the garden was not just a keeper of memories. It was a place for the forgotten. A sanctuary for the unremembered. Her hand touched the stone pillar where she had found the key, the first link in the chain of her journey here. It seemed to pulse under her touch, as if it, too, was waiting for her decision. Lyra wandered toward the back of the garden, past the stone circles, past the weeping trees, until she arrived at the clearing where she had first heard Evelyn's voice. The place was quieter now, but the wind still carried whispers, soft like voices from another time. There, beneath the willow tree, was the stone she had touched, the stone that had revealed Evelyn's name. But now, something else lay before her. The stone tablet had shifted. The markings, which had once been static, now seemed to ripple and flow, forming new words. Lyra knelt before the stone, her heart racing as she traced the letters with her fingers. This wasn't the same stone she had seen before. The symbols on its surface had changed. The message was clear. The stories belong to the living. Will you share them? or will you let them be lost, as they were meant to be? Lyra inhaled sharply. The question echoed through her, resonating in every fiber of her being. Could she truly share the garden's stories with the world? Could she risk exposing the sanctuary, allowing its quiet refuge to be disturbed by the eyes of the living? Yet, what would happen if she kept them hidden? Would the garden's magic fade? Would it become just another forgotten place, lost to time once again? She sat there for a long time, alone in the clearing, listening to the wind stir the leaves above her. Her thoughts were tangled, the choice weighing heavily on her heart. She thought of the people who had walked these paths before her, Evelyn, and the others whose names had been lost to the pages of the music box. They had all come here with their own burdens, their own stories. And somehow, they had left their mark. But now, she was the keeper of those marks, the keeper of those stories. Lyra stood slowly, wiping the tears from her eyes. She knew what she had to do. With a deep breath, she made her way to the stone tablet and whispered the name she had come to understand so well, the name that had awakened her to this journey. The Garden of Lost Echoes. As the words left her lips, the garden seemed to respond. The wind shifted, the trees whispered, and the earth beneath her feet seemed to hum with energy. The stone tablet's markings shimmered once more, and a new wave of understanding washed over her. She had made her choice. Lyra would share the stories. But she would do it on her own terms. She would protect the garden, but she would also share its magic, its wisdom, and its memories with the world. She would become its voice, a bridge between the past and the present, between the forgotten and the living. The wind picked up, and the chimes in the trees rang louder than ever before. It was as though the garden itself was cheering her on, urging her forward. And in that moment, Lyra understood. The garden's name was not just a memory, it was a legacy. And she, now its keeper, was ready to carry it forward. Act 9, The Threshold Between Worlds. The decision had been made. Lyra stood at the edge of the garden, the iron gate creaking in the wind as if it were beckoning her to leave, to step beyond the boundary that had once felt so absolute. The garden's secrets, its stories, its memories were now hers to share. She had chosen to be the keeper, but she also understood that keeping the stories hidden would be a betrayal of the garden's very essence. She could no longer protect it by isolating it. The garden was meant to be remembered. She placed the key in her pocket and turned away from the familiar path she had walked countless times. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the garden, making the leaves shimmer as though they were alive with history. Lyra felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had already come to terms with the fact that sharing the garden's stories would change everything. Once the world knew of the Garden of Lost Echoes, once the stories were spoken aloud, there was no going back. There would be eyes that would come with questions, with skepticism, with greed, perhaps. There would be people who would try to claim the garden as their own, to exploit its magic. And there were others, too, the ones who had been here before her. The souls whose names were etched into the music box, who had wandered these paths and left their footprints behind. The garden was more than just a place. It was a crossroads for the lost, the broken, and the forgotten. But it was also a place for healing. And now, it was up to Lyra to decide how the stories would be told. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, out of the gate and onto the path leading into the outside world. As she walked, she could feel the garden's presence behind her, not as a physical space, but as a pull, something inside her, urging her onward. It was as if the garden were reminding her that she was never truly alone. Her first stop was a small bookstore in the town just outside the garden. It had always been her haven, a place where she had spent hours as a child, browsing through books and lost in stories. She had often thought of the shopkeeper, an older man named Thomas, who had always had a quiet understanding of the world around him. He had known her well, even when she was just a girl. As she entered the shop, the familiar scent of old paper and ink greeted her. The shelves were lined with books, their spines worn and faded from years of use. Thomas looked up from behind the counter and smiled when he saw her. Well, Lyra," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "Haven't seen you around in a while. How have you been?" Lyra smiled softly. She had come here to find something, but she wasn't sure exactly what. She felt as though she were stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that she couldn't fully understand yet. "I've been, well," she said, her voice trailing off. She wasn't sure how to begin. How could she explain to Thomas what had happened? How could she put into words the overwhelming sense of responsibility she now carried, the weight of the stories she had promised to protect? Thomas seemed to sense her hesitation. He gestured to a chair by the window, where the sunlight spilled in like liquid gold. "Come, sit down. Tell me what's on your mind." Lyra sat, the chair creaking under her weight. She folded her hands in her lap, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She wanted to tell Thomas everything about the garden, about Evelyn, about the music box, about the voices that had called to her. But she also knew that sharing the garden's secrets with the outside world was more than just telling a story. It was opening a door. And once the door was open, there would be no closing it. "Thomas," Lyra began, her voice steady but quiet, "there's something I need to share with you. Something that's hard to explain." He nodded, his expression soft, patient. "Take your time." She took a deep breath. "I've found a place. A garden, hidden from the world. It's a place of memories. Stories. It's been there for longer than anyone can remember." Thomas didn't interrupt, but Lyra could see the curiosity flicker in his eyes. She continued. "It's a place where lost souls, forgotten memories, and old stories gather. The garden is alive with them. And it's not just a garden, it's a keeper. It's a place for the lost to find solace, for their stories to be heard." She paused, her heart racing. This was the moment when everything would change. She could feel the weight of the truth settling in her chest. There was no turning back now. "The garden chose me," she said softly, almost to herself. "I am its keeper now. I have to protect it, share its stories. But I'm not sure how to begin. I'm not sure how to tell the world what it is, without destroying the very thing that makes it special." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and thoughtful. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and measured. "You don't have to tell the world all at once, Lyra," he said. "You can share it in pieces, when the time is right. People will listen, but they'll need time to understand. And the garden will need time to adjust, too. If it's a place of memory, of souls, it will need you to guide it, just as much as you'll need to guide the people who hear its story." Lyra nodded slowly, taking in his words. She hadn't expected him to understand so easily, but somehow, she felt lighter after sharing her burden with him. It was the first step. She wasn't alone in this after all. As the afternoon turned into evening, Lyra stood to leave, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The garden was ready. And so was she. Act 10, The Garden's Guardians. The following weeks were a blur of emotions and decisions for Lyra. The more she shared the stories of the garden, the more she realized the weight of her choice. What she had once considered a secret, a quiet refuge for lost memories, was now something more. It had become a story in itself, one that was both beautiful and fragile. And, as with any story, there were those who sought it for reasons beyond mere curiosity. One afternoon, as Lyra walked along the familiar moss-covered paths of the garden, she felt the presence of someone behind her. She turned, expecting to see nothing more than the flutter of leaves or the playful dance of sunlight through the trees. But this time, it was different. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the gate, her eyes scanning the garden with an unsettling intensity. She was tall, with dark hair and a cloak that shimmered faintly, as though it were woven from shadows. There was something about her, something that felt off, a presence that didn't belong. Lyra's instincts kicked in immediately. She approached cautiously, but her voice was calm. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral, though she could feel her heart race in her chest. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who knew more than they let on, someone who had been waiting for this moment. "I've heard the stories," the woman said, her voice low and smooth. "The garden, the memories, the lost souls. I've heard it all. And I've come to see it for myself." Lyra's heart clenched. The stories were spreading faster than she had anticipated. This woman had heard them, and more importantly, she had come to seek the garden out. "The garden is a place for healing," Lyra said, trying to keep the tone of the conversation light, but she couldn't hide the unease in her voice. "It's not a place for everyone. It's a sanctuary for the lost." The The woman's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Is that what you believe?" she asked, her gaze drifting over the garden as though appraising it. "I think the garden has much more to offer than just solace. I think it holds power that could be used for more than just quiet memories. I think it could be used to shape the future, if we know how to unlock it." Lyra took a step back, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. This woman wasn't here for the stories. She wasn't here for the healing. She was here for something else, something darker. "The garden has no such power," Lyra said, her voice steady but firm. "It is a place for memories to be kept safe, for souls to find peace. It cannot be used. It is not a tool for control." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying Lyra with an unsettling intensity. "We'll see about that," she said softly, her eyes gleaming with a knowing light. Without another word, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the garden, leaving Lyra standing there, her mind racing. The encounter had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. This woman's words echoed in her mind: power. Unlock it? Lyra knew she couldn't let the garden fall into the wrong hands. She couldn't allow someone like that to twist the purpose of this place. The garden was a sanctuary, not a weapon. The next few days were filled with a growing sense of unease. Every rustle of the leaves, every shifting shadow seemed to carry a warning. Lyra kept close watch over the garden, making sure no one else entered without her knowledge. She had always known that the garden's stories were precious, but now she understood that they were also vulnerable. The more people who knew about it, the more at risk it became. Then, one evening, as Lyra walked deeper into the heart of the garden, she found something that made her blood run cold. A book. It wasn't just any book. It was an ancient volume, bound in dark leather with no title. It lay open on the stone bench, as though it had been left there deliberately. The pages were filled with symbols she didn't recognize, written in a script that seemed to shimmer and shift as she looked at it. The words on the pages didn't make sense, but there was something strangely familiar about them. As though they were speaking directly to her. She felt a pull toward the book, a deep, magnetic force. She reached for it. As soon as her fingers touched the pages, the ground beneath her seemed to vibrate. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the chimes in the distance rang louder than ever before, their song filled with urgency. Lyra pulled her hand back, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this book wasn't just an ordinary artifact. It was a key, an opening to something deeper, something older. It was a gateway. She closed the book and stood there, trembling, her mind racing. This was no longer just about protecting the stories. The garden had secrets, and someone was trying to unlock them. Someone was trying to use it. But what did they want with the garden? What was the power they sought? Lyra knew she had to act fast. The garden's stories were at risk, but so much more than that, the very essence of the garden was in danger. She couldn't let the wrong people take control. She had promised to protect this place. And she would do whatever it took to keep its secrets safe. Act 11, The Veil of Power. The evening air was thick with tension, the wind whispering through the trees like a warning. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the clearing, the ancient book still weighing heavily in her hands. The words, the symbols, had burned themselves into her mind, leaving behind a sense of foreboding that refused to fade. The garden was not just a place of memories, it was a gateway. A door to something deeper, something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. The presence of the woman, the one who had come seeking the garden's power, still lingered in the air like an ominous cloud. Lyra had seen the spark in the woman's eyes, the hunger for something more, something beyond the garden's peaceful existence. She had come for the stories, but not to protect them. She had come to use them. Lyra turned the book over in her hands, feeling its weight, its ancient energy. It had been left in the garden for a reason. But why? What did the garden's power truly hold? The more Lyra thought about it, the more she realized that the answers were just out of reach. She had always known the garden held secrets, but she had never truly understood the depth of those secrets until now. The night felt heavier as she made her way deeper into the garden, past the weeping willow and the stone circle, to the place where she had first encountered Evelyn. The clearing was quiet, the air still, and yet the ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though the garden itself was aware of her every step. Lyra knelt at the edge of the stone circle, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the tablet. The markings that had once been still were now shifting again, as if they were alive, moving with purpose. The name of the Garden of Lost Echoes, was written in the center of the stone, but beneath it, new words had appeared. The past cannot be undone, but the future can be shaped. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The words were a warning, but also a promise. The garden was not just a keeper of memories. It was a creator of them, a place where the past and the future could intertwine, where stories could be written and rewritten. The power to change the course of history lay within its walls. But could it be controlled? Could she protect it from those who sought to exploit it? A rustle in the distance broke Lyra from her thoughts. Her heart raced as she stood and turned, instinctively reaching for the key in her pocket. She could feel the presence of someone nearby, someone who was not supposed to be here. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the clearing. It was the woman, the one who had come searching for the garden. Her eyes gleamed with that same unsettling hunger, and Lyra felt the air around her crackle with tension. "You've come to see it, haven't you?" the woman said, her voice smooth but laced with something darker. "The power that lies within this place. I knew it was here. I knew it was waiting to be unlocked." Lyra took a step back, her grip tightening on the key. She had to be careful. This woman wasn't just a wanderer. She was here with intent, with purpose. "The garden doesn't belong to you," Lyra said firmly, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "It is a place of peace, of memories, of healing." It is not a tool for power. The woman smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile. You don't understand, do you? She asked, taking a step forward. This garden, this place has been waiting for someone to unlock its potential. And now that I've found it, I intend to make use of it. You've been chosen to be its keeper, yes. But that doesn't mean you control it. The garden has its own plans. Lyra's pulse quickened. She could feel the garden's energy shifting, responding to the woman's words, but it wasn't the same energy she had felt before. It was darker, more twisted. What are you going to do? Lyra demanded, stepping closer, her eyes narrowed. What do you think the garden will allow you to do? The woman's smile widened, and for the first time, Lyra saw the true intent in her eyes. I think the garden will empower me, the woman said softly. I will be its master. And with that power, I can reshape the world. I can rewrite history, create a new future, one where the past no longer holds us back. Lyra took a deep breath, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had always known that the garden's stories were powerful, that they held the key to something greater. But she had never imagined that someone would seek to control that power. You won't get away with this, Lyra said, her voice fierce. Oh, I already have, the woman replied with a sly smile. The garden listens to those who understand its language. And I understand it better than you ever could. With that, the woman raised her hand, and the air around them seemed to ripple. The garden itself responded to her touch, the trees shifting, the wind howling, the ground trembling. Lyra felt the earth beneath her feet quake as if the garden was being torn apart, the delicate balance between the past and the present, between memory and power, beginning to unravel. The woman stepped forward, but Lyra was ready. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key to the garden's heart. She raised it high, calling upon the garden's energy, pulling it toward her with all the strength she could muster. The ground beneath her feet trembled once again, but this time, it was not in response to the woman's power. It was in response to her own. I am the keeper, Lyra whispered, her voice firm and clear. And this garden is mine to protect. The garden itself seemed to answer her, the wind picking up in a fierce gust, swirling around them both, pushing the woman back. The energy of the garden, the very essence of its memory, surged around Lyra like a protective shield, pushing the woman away with overwhelming force. The woman stumbled back, her expression twisted in shock and fury. This isn't over, she snarled, her eyes burning with anger. The garden's power is too great. You can't keep it from me forever. But before she could say more, the wind howled one last time, and she vanished into the shadows, her form dissipating like smoke in the air. Lyra stood alone in the clearing, the wind still swirling around her, the garden humming with energy. She breathed heavily, her heart racing. The battle was not over. She had defended the garden for now. but the woman's words lingered in her mind. The garden's power was real. And others would come for it. They would seek to exploit it, to bend it to their will. But Lyra would not let that happen. She was the garden's keeper, and she would protect it with everything she had. The garden had chosen her. And now, she had chosen to protect it for all the lost souls who had come before, and for all those who would come after. Act 12, The Guardians of the Garden. The garden was quiet once again. The wind had stilled, the chimes hung motionless in the trees, and the branches of the ancient willow swayed gently, as if nothing had happened. But Lyra knew better. The peace that surrounded her now was only temporary, an illusion. The woman who had sought to control the garden's power had left, but her presence still lingered like a shadow in the corners of her mind. Lyra sat on the stone bench, the weight of the key heavy in her pocket. She had protected the garden once, but she knew it was only a matter of time before others would come. The power of the garden, the stories it held, the memories it preserved, they were too valuable to be ignored. And as long as it existed, there would always be those who would seek to exploit it. The quiet was shattered by the sound of footsteps approaching. Lyra's senses immediately heightened. She knew it wasn't the woman from before. This was different. The footsteps were slower, more deliberate. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift as a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. A man stepped into the clearing, his presence unmistakable. He was tall, with dark, unruly hair, and his eyes sharp, calculating, were fixed on her. His expression was one of knowing, as if he had expected this moment for a long time. Lyra stood, instinctively placing her hand over the key in her pocket. This wasn't just any stranger. She could feel it in the air. This man wasn't here by accident. He had come for something. "I've heard the stories," the man said, his voice low and smooth, like the rustle of wind through dry leaves. "The garden. The lost souls. The memories that linger in the air. I've come to see it for myself." Lyra's heart raced. She had heard those words before, spoken with the same sense of entitlement, the same hunger for power. She knew immediately that he was not here for healing, for peace, or for any noble purpose. He was here for the same reason the woman had come before him, to control what could not be controlled. "The garden doesn't belong to you," Lyra said firmly, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. "It's a sanctuary for those who are lost, a place of memories. You cannot take it." The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who believed they had already won. "Who says I want to take it?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock innocence. "I don't want to take the garden. I want to understand it. To use it. The stories, the memories, they're not just stories. They're a key. A key to something far greater than you or I." Lyra took a step back, her pulse quickening. She had felt it before, the weight of the garden's power. But this man wasn't talking about memories or healing. He was talking about something darker. Something that could destroy everything the garden stood for. "I won't let you use it," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "The garden is not a weapon. It's not meant to be used. It's meant to be protected." The man's smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold calculation. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, his tone now dark and threatening. "The garden is more than just a place. It's an anchor. A bridge between the past and the future. And I intend to use it to change the future. To reshape the world as it should be." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had known the garden was powerful, but she hadn't realized how deeply the knowledge of its power could affect someone. This man, this stranger, he was not just seeking control. He was seeking to change everything. "You can't change what's already been," Lyra said, her voice rising, her words sharp with conviction. "The garden's power lies in its memory, in the stories it holds. It is a place for those who need to be remembered, not manipulated. You can't erase the past to create the future you want." The man took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You are naive," he said, his voice cold and cutting. "The past is nothing more than a series of echoes. It's the future that matters. And the future belongs to those who understand how to harness the power of the garden." Before Lyra could respond, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen force. She felt the key in her pocket begin to hum, its energy resonating with the earth beneath her. The garden was reacting to the presence of this man it was pushing back. He wasn't alone. Out of the shadows, several figures appeared, stepping into the clearing with the same air of purpose as the man. They moved like shadows, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods, their eyes gleaming with a strange, unsettling light. They surrounded her, blocking her path to the gate. Lyra felt the weight of the situation settle over her. She was outnumbered, and their presence felt different. These weren't just ordinary people. They were connected to something else, something darker, something that had been watching the garden from the shadows for much longer than she had realized. The man stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Give it up," he said. "Give me the key. Or I'll take it from you." Lyra clenched her fists, her grip tightening around the key in her pocket. She could feel the energy of the garden swirling around her, responding to her determination. The stories, the memories, they were all tied to the land, to the earth beneath her feet. She could feel it, the connection, the pulse. The garden was alive with power. But it was also fragile. And she couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. "I won't let you use it," Lyra said, her voice strong, defiant. "The garden will not be used for your selfish gain. It's not a tool for power. It's a place of peace. A sanctuary." The man's eyes flashed with anger, and he took another step forward. His voice was now cold and threatening. "You're standing in my way," he said, his hand reaching toward her. "You'll regret this." Lyra's heart raced, but she knew what she had to do. She could feel the garden's energy building around her, the connection growing stronger with every breath she took. She had to protect it. She had to protect the stories. With a swift movement, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the key. The moment it touched her palm, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The air crackled with energy, and a burst of light exploded from the key, pushing back against the figures surrounding her. The garden responded. It wasn't just a passive witness anymore, it was an active participant in the fight to protect itself. The trees swayed, the wind howled, and the very earth beneath her feet seemed to rise up in defense of its keeper. The man staggered back, his face twisted with rage. The figures around him faltered, their movements slowing as the power of the garden surged around them. "You cannot control it," Lyra said, her voice steady, filled with the power of the garden itself. "The garden cannot be tamed. It is not yours to wield." With that, the light from the key intensified, pushing the figures back, pushing them out of the garden. The man's expression changed, from anger to fear, as he realized that the garden's power was not something he could control. It was something that chose its own path, its own protector. With a final, defiant glare, the man and his followers vanished into the shadows, retreating from the garden's grasp. Lyra stood alone in the clearing, her chest heaving, her heart racing. The garden had responded to her. It had chosen her. And now, she understood more clearly than ever that it was her responsibility to protect it. She was its keeper, and no one would take that from her. But she also knew this was only the beginning. The garden's power was too great to be ignored. And there would be others who would come for it. The battle had just begun. Act 13, The Garden's Transformation. The weeks that followed were both quiet and stormy in their own way. The garden, though still as beautiful as ever, had changed. There was a new energy in the air, a subtle hum beneath the earth that seemed to pulse with each passing day. It wasn't just the weather that had shifted. No, this was something deeper, something more fundamental. Lyra had always known the garden was special, but now it felt like it was alive in a way it never had been before. It was not just a collection of memories, it was a living, breathing entity, a place that was growing, shifting, and changing with every heartbeat of the earth. The once still trees now whispered more urgently, their branches swaying in ways that defied the wind. The chimes sang a new song, one that was unfamiliar, almost discordant, but strangely compelling. Lyra walked the paths of the garden every day, but each time, it felt different. The familiar stone pillars now seemed to lean closer, as if they were watching her, waiting for something. The flowers bloomed in patterns she had never seen before, their petals twisting into shapes that seemed to echo the markings in the ancient book she had found. The stones in the circles shifted, their positions subtly altered each time she passed by. The garden was changing, and with it, Her connection to it was growing stronger, more intense. But as the garden transformed, so did the threats against it. Lyra had thought the danger was behind her when the man and his followers had retreated, but the world beyond the garden had not forgotten about it. Whispers of the garden's power had spread beyond the town, carried by those who sought it for their own purposes. Some wanted to exploit its power, while others simply wanted to understand it, to control it. Either way, Lyra knew that as the garden's keeper, she had to protect it, no matter the cost. One afternoon, as she wandered deeper into the heart of the garden, she felt it a pull, deep in her chest, like a magnetic force drawing her toward the stone tablet where the markings had first appeared. The garden seemed to pulse with energy, the air thick with anticipation. She approached the tablet, her heart pounding in her chest. The symbols on the stone had shifted once again, forming new words, new messages that she had not seen before. The garden holds no master but its keeper. To protect it, you must understand it. The words were clear, but their meaning was still elusive. Lyra had always known she was the garden's keeper, but what did it mean to truly understand it? She had heard the whispers of the garden, felt its pulse beneath her feet, but there was still so much she didn't know. So much she couldn't explain. As she stood there, lost in thought, a shadow fell over her. She turned quickly, her instincts flaring. A figure stood in the clearing, silhouetted by the fading sunlight. It was a man, a stranger, with dark eyes and a hooded cloak that fluttered slightly in the breeze. "Who are you?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but guarded. The man smiled, though it was not a reassuring smile. It was a smile of someone who had come to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. "My name is Kalen," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "And I've come to see the garden for myself." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the name before, whispers of Kalen, a man who had sought the garden for years, searching for its power. The name was not unfamiliar to her. He was one of the many who had come seeking what could not be taken. "The garden is not a place for those who seek power," Lyra said firmly. "It is a sanctuary for memories, for stories. It cannot be controlled." Kalen's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "That's where you're wrong, Lyra. The garden is not just a sanctuary. It is a key. A key to something much greater. It holds the power to shape reality itself, to rewrite history. I've come to claim it." Lyra stepped back, her pulse quickening. The garden's energy seemed to shift around her, the trees swaying in an unnatural rhythm, the ground beneath her feet trembling ever so slightly. She had known that others would come for the garden, but to hear it from Kalen's lips, to hear him speak of shaping reality, sent a cold shiver down her spine. "You don't understand," Lyra said, her voice trembling with urgency. "The garden is not a weapon. It is a place for the lost to find peace. For their stories to be remembered. You can't control it. You can't change it. Kalen's eyes darkened. You still don't understand, do you? This garden, this place has the power to change everything. And you, Lyra, are standing in my way. Before she could respond, the ground beneath her feet rumbled. The trees began to shake, their branches groaning as though they were alive with pain. The chimes, too, seemed to grow louder, their melody turning sharp and unsettling. Kalen raised his hands, and the air around him began to shimmer. He was tapping into the power of the garden, pulling its energy toward him, attempting to harness its strength for his own purposes. Lyra reached for the key in her pocket, her hand trembling as she pulled it free. She could feel the garden's power stirring inside her, responding to her, urging her to act. No. Lyra shouted, her voice ringing out like a command. You can't control it. With a forceful movement, she raised the key above her head, calling upon the garden's energy to protect itself. The wind howled, the ground beneath her feet shuddered, and the air crackled with raw power. The garden, as if awakened by her command, responded. The earth beneath Kalen's feet buckled, and he stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. The power of the garden was too much for him to control. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches reaching for him, holding him back as the ground trembled. You think you can control it? Lyra shouted, her voice full of authority. You think you can use it to change the world? The garden cannot be used, Kalen. It is a place of peace. And if you try to take that from it, you'll never leave. Kalen's face twisted in rage, but he couldn't break free from the grip of the garden's power. The trees and the earth held him in place, their roots deep in the soil, binding him to the ground. You can't stop me forever, he growled, but his voice was weaker now, filled with desperation. I'll find another way. I will take the power. With that, the ground around him seemed to collapse, and Kalen vanished, swallowed by the earth itself. The garden released its grip, the trees stilling, the air settling back into its natural rhythm. Lyra stood there, breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. The garden had defended itself again. But she knew this was not the end. Kalen would return. Others would come for the garden's power. And Lyra would have to be ready. But for now, the garden was safe. The stories remained protected. And Lyra, the keeper of the garden, had once again fulfilled her duty. But the garden was changing. It was growing stronger, more aware. And soon, Lyra would have to learn how to understand it in ways she hadn't yet imagined. Act 14, The Garden's Awakening. The days after Kalen's failed attempt to seize the garden's power were filled with an uneasy calm. The winds were quieter, the chimes had stopped their unsettling melody, and the garden once again seemed to settle into its usual rhythm. Yet, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The garden had always felt alive to her, but now it felt as though it was more than just a place. It was becoming something else, something more. Lyra wandered the paths every day, trying to feel out the changes. The air was thicker now, heavier with the scent of earth and flowers, as though the garden itself had grown more present, more aware. The once still stones now hummed with a strange energy, and the trees seemed to watch her, their branches swaying even when there was no wind. She stopped at the stone circle near the center of the garden, where the markings had shifted so many times before. Today, they glowed faintly, like runes pulsing with a life of their own. As her fingers brushed the cool surface of the stone, the words seemed to rearrange themselves, forming a new message. The garden awakens. It remembers more than you know. Lyra frowned, her pulse quickening. She had always felt a deep connection to the garden, but this felt different. The messages had always been cryptic, but now, they seemed to speak directly to her, as though the garden itself was reaching out. She stood there for a long moment, lost in thought, when the ground beneath her feet suddenly shifted. It was a small tremor at first, but it grew, the earth shaking with a quiet, rhythmic pulse. The stone beneath her hands began to warm, as if it were alive, its energy responding to the movement. Lyra stepped back, her heart pounding. She had never felt anything like this before. The garden was changing, yes, but now, it was awakening, its power growing in ways that she couldn't predict. A voice whispered on the wind, soft and urgent. The past is not all that it seems. The future is in your hands, keeper. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She turned, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one. The wind had died down again, leaving only the stillness of the garden around her. But the voice, it felt like it had come from within the earth itself, from deep beneath the roots of the trees. She could feel it in her bones, a deep resonance that connected her to something ancient. The garden had spoken to her before, but never like this. This was more than a whisper, it was a call. A call to understand, to embrace the power that lay hidden within the earth. With trembling hands, Lyra pulled the key from her pocket. She held it high, feeling the familiar hum of energy as it vibrated in her palm. The key was her connection to the garden, its pulse, its heartbeat. But now, it felt different. It felt like it was growing stronger, more attuned to her. She had always been its keeper, but what if she was meant to be more? What if the garden had chosen her for something greater? She had always protected its stories, its memories, but now she felt a deeper responsibility. The garden was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a living being, and its power was growing. It was reaching out, calling to her, asking her to understand it in a way she had never imagined. The ground trembled again, and Lyra's eyes widened as the stone beneath her feet began to crack. Slowly, the earth parted, revealing a hidden passage leading down into the depths of the garden. The air grew heavier, the scent of earth and flowers mingling with something deeper, something ancient. Lyra hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. The passage was narrow, the walls lined with roots and vines that pulsed with energy, their tendrils reaching toward her as if they knew she was coming. She followed the path, her steps steady but filled with anticipation. the deeper she went, the more she could feel the garden's power thrumming through the earth beneath her. As she reached the bottom, she found herself in a large cavern, the walls illuminated by glowing moss and crystals. In the center of the cavern was a massive stone pool, its surface rippling with an ethereal light. The water shimmered with colors she had never seen before, like reflections of stars and galaxies swirling beneath the surface. The air here was thick with magic, and the hum of the garden's power was palpable. It was as though this place was the heart of the garden, the source of its life and energy. And Lyra could feel it, the pulse, beating in time with her own heart. She stepped closer to the pool, her fingers brushing the edge of the stone. As soon as her hand touched the surface, the water rippled, and the images within it began to shift. She saw flashes of memories, some familiar, some unknown, stories of the garden, of those who had come before her. She saw Evelyn's face, her smile filled with both sorrow and understanding. She saw others, lost souls, wandering through the garden, their faces blurred and shifting like shadows. And then, the images changed. Lyra gasped as she saw a vision of herself standing at the edge of the garden, the key in her hand, the power of the garden swirling around her like a storm. But this vision wasn't her own. It was a future. A future where she stood alone, the garden's power overwhelming her, its energy consuming her very being. She pulled her hand away from the water, her heart racing. She had seen something terrible, something that could happen if she wasn't careful. The garden's power was not something to be taken lightly. If she allowed it to consume her, if she failed to protect it, the consequences would be catastrophic. But what could she do? The power of the garden was awakening, and she could feel it calling to her. It was tempting, more tempting than anything she had ever felt before. But she knew that if she gave in, if she allowed herself to be consumed by the garden's magic, she would lose herself. Lyra stood in the cavern for what felt like hours, lost in thought. The garden's power was growing, and she could feel it pulling at her. But she also knew that she couldn't let it control her. She had to remain its keeper, its protector. She had to understand it, to learn how to use its power without letting it consume her. With a deep breath, she turned away from the pool and made her way back up the passage. The air felt different now, heavier with the weight of the decision she had made. The garden's power was not something she could ignore. It was a force of nature, one that she could not control, but one that she could learn to work with. Lyra stepped back into the garden, the wind picking up around her as if the earth itself was aware of her return. She had made her choice. She would protect the garden, but she would also learn to understand it. She would not let the power consume her. The garden had chosen her, and she would not fail it. Act 15, The Balance of Power. The garden had grown silent once again, but this silence was different. It was not the peaceful quiet that had once filled the air, but a stillness that seemed to hum with an undercurrent of anticipation. The wind no longer whispered in gentle breezes, instead, it swirled around her, carrying the faintest tremor, as if the garden itself was waiting. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, the weight of the decision she had made still heavy on her heart, She had chosen to protect the garden, to guide it, to learn from it. But she had also chosen to understand its power, to wield it, but not let it consume her. She had felt the garden's magic surge beneath her feet when she had held the key, the hum of ancient energy coursing through her body. The connection was undeniable. It was as if she and the garden were one, her heartbeat in rhythm with the pulse of the earth beneath her. But she also knew that this power could be dangerous. It could be tempting. It could easily consume her, just as it had threatened to do in the vision she had seen in the pool. Lyra had always known that the garden was special, but now, more than ever, she understood that it was not just a place of stories and memories. It was a living, breathing entity, with a heart that beat deep in the soil and a soul that stretched far beyond the walls of its garden. And it was awakening. The power was rising. And she was its keeper. But what did that mean? She had spent days walking the paths of the garden, trying to find answers. The trees had grown taller, their roots twisting deeper into the earth. The flowers bloomed in strange patterns, their colors more vibrant than ever before. The chimes rang louder, their song now a haunting melody that echoed through the garden like a call to the past. The air felt thicker, charged with energy, and it wasn't just the magic of the garden she could feel. It was the weight of its history, its memories, pressing down on her. Lyra made her way to the heart of the garden, to the stone circle where it all began. The stone tablet was still there, its markings shifting as they always did, but this time, something was different. The symbols that had once been fluid, always changing, were now solid. They glowed faintly, their edges sharp and clear, as if they were waiting for her to do something. She reached out and placed her fingers on the stone. Immediately, the ground trembled beneath her feet. The air grew warmer, thick with energy, and the garden responded, its power reacting to her touch, to her presence. And then, the voice came again. The past is woven into the garden's roots. The future lies in your hands, keeper. But the balance must be maintained. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the voice before, but now, it felt different, stronger, more urgent. It was the voice of the garden itself, speaking to her, guiding her. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible against the rising hum of the garden. "What balance?" The voice didn't answer directly, but the ground shifted beneath her feet, pulling her gaze downward. She saw, etched into the stone, new symbols she hadn't noticed before. They were ancient, older than any of the markings she had seen, and they seemed to pulse with energy, each one a key to something deeper. "You must understand the power you hold, keeper. The garden is not a tool. It is a living force. To control it is to understand its essence." Lyra felt a sudden weight in her chest, as though the garden was testing her. She had always felt the power of the garden, but she had never truly understood it. She had only scratched the surface, hearing the whispers of the past, feeling the pull of the stories it held. But now, the garden was asking her to step deeper, to embrace its magic fully. And she knew she could feel it, that this was not a power she could ignore. The garden had already begun to change, its energy rising, pulsing with the magic that had been waiting for someone like her to awaken it. But with this power came responsibility. She could sense it now, the danger. The potential for destruction, for chaos, if the garden's power were used recklessly. The balance between past and future, memory and power, had to be maintained. And she was the one who had to do it. But how? Lyra closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to center herself. She reached for the key in her pocket, feeling its warmth, its connection to the garden's heartbeat. She knew that to unlock the full potential of the garden, she would have to trust herself and trust the garden. With a quiet breath, she raised the key, holding it high above her head. The garden's energy responded immediately, surging around her, pulling the power from the earth, from the trees, from the stones. The wind howled, the chimes rang louder, and the earth beneath her feet seemed to tremble with anticipation. Lyra could feel the energy coursing through her, flooding her veins with light. She could feel the garden's stories swirling around her, pulling at her soul, urging her to let go, to surrender to the power. It was overwhelming, dizzying, but she held on. She had to. She was the keeper. She couldn't let it consume her. The garden's power surged again, and this time, Lyra let it. She let it fill her, let it guide her, let it show her the balance she needed to maintain. She saw visions, flashes of the past, of those who had come before her, of the garden's history, of the lives that had been shaped by its magic. She saw the future, too, a future where the garden's power was a force for good, for healing, for peace. But she also saw the darkness, the chaos that could arise if the balance were tipped too far. She saw a world where the garden's power was twisted, corrupted, used to control rather than protect. She saw the people who would come to exploit it, to bend it to their will. And she saw herself, standing alone, the weight of the garden's power pressing down on her, threatening to break her. Lyra snapped her eyes open, gasping for air. She had felt it, the power, the responsibility. It was all real. The garden was not just a sanctuary. It was a force of nature, a living entity with the power to change the world. But she had to protect it. She had to understand it. The power surged again, but this time, Lyra knew what to do. She focused, drawing the energy back, letting it settle within her. The garden's power hummed beneath her feet, but it no longer felt overwhelming. She was in control, but just barely. She lowered the key, and the garden's energy settled, the wind dying down, the chimes falling silent. The ground stopped shaking, and the air grew still once again. Lyra stood in the center of the stone circle, her breath ragged, her heart still racing. She had done it. She had unlocked the garden's power, but only just. She had learned to control it, to understand it. But the balance was delicate. She couldn't afford to lose it. The garden had awoken. And with it, Lyra had learned the true cost of her role as its keeper. The power she had unleashed was both a gift and a curse, and she would have to carry its burden for the rest of her life. Act 16, The Weight of the Garden. The garden had shifted. The days following her encounter in the cavern, where Lyra had unlocked the power of the garden, felt like she was living in a dream where the boundaries between reality and magic blurred. Every step she took seemed to echo the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, every breath a reminder of the power she now carried. But with the garden's power came the burden of understanding it. The magic was not something she could control with ease. It had awakened something in her, a deep connection to the earth, to the memories, to the stories that lived within the garden. But it was also pushing her in ways she hadn't expected. The wind, which had once whispered softly in the trees, now howled through the branches, carrying with it a feeling of unease. The chimes no longer sang in harmony, their sound was dissonant, jagged, as if the garden itself was conflicted, unsure of what it had become. The flowers, which had once bloomed with beauty and peace, now twisted in odd shapes, their petals curling in unnatural patterns. Lyra walked the paths of the garden, feeling the weight of it all. She had done what she thought was necessary, she had unlocked its power, its true potential, but now, she was unsure if it had been the right decision. The garden was changing, and so was she. As she reached the stone circle, the place where everything had begun, Lyra felt the familiar hum of energy beneath her feet. But it wasn't the peaceful hum she had felt before. This time, it was darker, more intense, as if the very foundation of the garden was shifting beneath her. She knelt before the stone tablet, her fingers brushing the markings that had shifted so many times before. This time, the symbols were different. They were jagged, sharp, their edges glowing with the red light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. As she touched the stone, the energy surged through her, sending a shock of power straight to her core. She gasped, her body trembling as the garden's energy flooded her senses. The world around her seemed to bend and warp, the trees and the earth blurring into a swirl of colors and shapes. The power was overwhelming, consuming, and for a moment, she feared she might lose herself in it. But then, the vision shifted. In the swirling chaos of light and shadow, Lyra saw a figure, a woman, standing alone in the distance. Her face was familiar, but she couldn't place the name. The woman's eyes were filled with sorrow, but also with something deeper, something Lyra couldn't quite understand. "You've unleashed it," the woman said, her voice echoing in Lyra's mind. "You've awakened the garden's true power. But do you understand what that means?" Lyra's voice caught in her throat. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The woman stepped forward, her form flickering like a flame. "You think you can control it," the woman continued, her voice growing louder. "But you can't. The garden's power isn't meant to be controlled. It was never meant to be wielded by one person. It's a force, a living entity. And now that it's awake, it will do what it must." Lyra took a step back, her heart racing. The garden's power had always felt like a gift, but now, in the woman's words, it sounded like a curse. A force that could not be tamed, not by her, not by anyone. What do you mean? Lyra asked, her voice trembling. What is the garden truly? The woman's face softened, a sad smile playing on her lips. It is not just a place of memories, she said. It is a living thing, a keeper of all that has been, all that could be. And now that it is awake, it will bring both creation and destruction. Lyra's mind reeled. She had always known the garden was powerful, but she had never realized its true nature. It was not just a sanctuary for lost souls and forgotten stories, it was a force, a living, breathing entity that could shape the world in ways she had never imagined. The vision faded, leaving Lyra standing alone in the stone circle. The air around her had grown still again, the hum of the garden's energy slowly fading. But the words of the woman echoed in her mind, warning her of the danger of the power she had unleashed. Lyra's heart was heavy as she rose to her feet. The power of the garden was not something she could control. It was a living force, something far greater than her. She had awoken it, but now, she had to learn how to live with it, to understand it. She couldn't let it consume her, and she couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. The balance of the garden was delicate. She had to protect it, but she also had to learn how to wield its power without losing herself in it. She turned and walked back toward the center of the garden, her mind swirling with questions. What had the woman meant by creation and destruction? Was the garden truly capable of changing the world? As she passed by the ancient trees, she noticed something new. The flowers, once twisted and strange, had begun to bloom again, their petals unfolding into delicate shapes. The wind had calmed, and the chimes sang once more, their melody soft and sweet. It was as if the garden had listened to her, as if it had understood her fears and was trying to reassure her. But Lyra knew better. She knew that this was only temporary. The garden's power was not something that could be tamed, not by her, and not by anyone. And if she was going to protect it, she would have to learn to understand it in ways she hadn't yet imagined. The garden had awoken, and with it, a new chapter of Lyra's journey had begun. But the road ahead was uncertain, and the power of the garden was not something to be taken lightly. The balance would be hard to maintain. And Lyra was about to face challenges she had never dreamed of. Act 17, The Test of the Keeper. The days after Lyra's awakening to the garden's power felt both like a burden and a blessing. The energy that had surged through her body during the ceremony at the stone circle had left its mark. Her body felt different, as if it were attuned to something larger than herself. The garden was not just a place, it was a living entity, and Lyra, its keeper, was now intimately tied to it in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. The garden had begun to change in ways that went beyond just the physical. There was a pull in the air, a tension that lingered in the breeze. The chimes, once peaceful, now carried a note of warning. The trees, which had once whispered gently to her, now murmured in urgency, as if they were trying to tell her something she couldn't quite understand. The stones of the garden had shifted once more, their shapes and markings growing more complex, more intricate. Every day, new symbols appeared, new connections were made, and each one seemed to carry more weight than the last. The garden was communicating with her, but it was speaking in a language she had yet to decipher completely. Lyra had spent hours each day walking the garden, trying to understand the messages, trying to feel the pulse of its power. She was beginning to feel the magic deep within her, like a second heartbeat. It was not something she could ignore, it was part of her now. But she knew that with this power came great responsibility, and she could not let it overwhelm her. One evening, as she walked near the clearing where the stone circle stood, Lyra felt the familiar pull of the garden's energy. But this time, it was different. It was stronger, more insistent, as though the garden itself was calling to her, urging her to understand something deeper. She approached the circle, her breath catching as the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The air around her thickened, and the once gentle rustling of the trees became a low, ominous hum. Lyra placed her hands on the stone, and immediately, the markings on the surface shifted, swirling in patterns she had never seen before. The stone seemed to come alive beneath her touch, and the voice spoke again, louder this time, more urgent. The garden is more than just memories. It is power. The power to change, to heal, and to destroy. But you must choose, keeper. Will you use it to protect? Or will you let it consume you? Lyra's heart raced as the ground around her began to tremble more violently. The energy of the garden surged through her, its raw power threatening to overwhelm her senses. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself, to focus on the connection she had with the garden. She had always known that this power came with a price. But now, she felt the weight of that price in every fiber of her being. The voice continued, its tone filled with sorrow and warning. You cannot have both, keeper. The power you hold is not a gift. It is a test. A test of your will, your heart, and your soul. The garden will not allow you to misuse it. It will not allow you to wield it for your own desires. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as the images flashed before her eyes, the vision of herself standing alone, her hands raised to the sky, the garden's power swirling around her like a storm. The same vision she had seen in the pool beneath the willow tree. The same vision of destruction. Her hands trembled as she pulled them away from the stone. The garden's energy receded, but it didn't feel like a release. It felt like a warning. A warning that if she wasn't careful, the very power she had unlocked would tear her apart from the inside. She had made a choice before to protect the garden, to understand its power. But now, she was being asked to make a new choice. A choice between using the power for good or risking everything for the chance of controlling it. Lyra stood alone in the clearing, the wind swirling around her. She had always known the garden held power, but she hadn't fully understood what it meant to wield it. She had felt its pull, its call, but now she realized that the garden's power was not just something that could be used. It was something that could be lost. If she lost control, if she let the garden's power consume her, there would be no going back. She could destroy everything she had worked to protect, everything the garden stood for. But if she kept it to herself, if she refused to use it, to accept the responsibility, it would wither, become nothing more than a fading memory, locked away in the past. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rustling in the bushes. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a man, his face familiar. It was Kalen, the same man who had tried to take control of the garden's power. Lyra's heart sank as she saw him standing there, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "I see you figured it out," Kalen said, his voice dark and cold. "The garden's power, the responsibility, the choice. It's all a test, isn't it? A test to see who is worthy. But I'm afraid you're too weak to pass it, Lyra." Lyra stood her ground, her fingers instinctively curling around the key in her pocket. "You failed once before, Kalen," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "You can't take the garden's power. It's not meant to be used for your selfish desires." Kalen's smile twisted into a sneer as he took a step forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said. "The garden's power is not a gift. It's a weapon. And if you won't use it, then I will." Before Lyra could respond, Kalen raised his hands, and the ground beneath them trembled. The garden's energy flared, swirling around him like a storm, a vortex of raw magic that threatened to engulf everything in its path. Lyra felt the power of the garden surging around her, and for a moment, she was tempted. She could feel its pull, its call to her, urging her to embrace it, to fight back with the power she had unlocked. But she knew she had to control it. She couldn't let it consume her. She raised her hand, focusing all of her energy on the connection she had with the garden. The key in her pocket began to hum with power, its light shining brightly as she called upon the garden's energy to push back against Kalen's force. "You can't control it, Kalen," Lyra said, her voice firm, filled with the strength of the garden's power. "This is not your fight." With a burst of energy, the garden's power surged around her, pushing Kalen back, his body thrown to the ground as the earth around them shook. The storm of magic faded, leaving only silence in its wake. Lyra stood, her chest heaving, her heart still pounding. She had done it. She had used the garden's power not to destroy, but to protect. To maintain the balance. But she knew that this was only a temporary victory. The garden's power was too great to be left unchecked. Kalen would return, and others like him would come, seeking the power for themselves. Lyra had passed the test for now. But she knew the real challenge was just beginning. Final act, the keeper's choice. The garden was still. There was no wind, no rustling leaves, no gentle hum of the chimes in the distance. It was as though time itself had paused, waiting for something. Or someone. Lyra stood at the center of the stone circle, her hand resting lightly on the key that hung from her neck. The garden was hers now, its stories and memories a part of her. She had unlocked its power, learned to control it, but it had come with a cost. The magic, the energy that pulsed through her veins, had changed her, and in doing so, it had changed the garden. It had awakened something in her, something that could not be easily ignored. The garden had given her its trust. But what had it cost her? She looked around, taking in the familiar sights: the towering trees, the stone paths, the flowers that bloomed in radiant colors. Everything was as it should be. Yet something felt different. The garden was still, but she could feel a storm brewing beneath the surface. The balance that had held it together was beginning to fracture, and she knew it. For the first time, she felt the weight of the power she held. It was not a gift. It was a responsibility. A choice. And the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. There was only one way to ensure the garden's survival, and it wasn't by keeping its power for herself. The key to the garden's strength was not in the ability to control it, but in the willingness to let go. Lyra's mind returned to the moment she had unlocked the power, when she had seen the visions of the future, of the destruction, of the chaos that could come if the garden's magic were used selfishly. She had seen the shadows of those who would seek to exploit it, to wield it for their own ends. And she had seen the danger of losing herself in it. The garden was not meant to be controlled, nor was it meant to be hoarded. It was a living entity, a force that needed to flow freely. Its power was not for one person to command. It was for the world, for the memories it held, for the lost souls that wandered through it. And now, Lyra knew what she had to do. She stepped toward the center of the circle, her heart heavy with the decision that lay ahead. The garden had chosen her, but it had also shown her something deeper, something more important than the magic she held in her hands. The garden needed to be free. She closed her eyes, reaching deep into her soul, feeling the connection to the earth, to the garden, to the stories it held. The power that had surged through her body began to fade, but she didn't resist it. Instead, she welcomed it. She released the magic, letting it flow out of her, back into the garden, where it belonged. The key around her neck warmed, its light fading as the connection between her and the garden softened. The wind began to stir, the chimes rang once more, their melody sweet and pure, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. The garden was alive again, but this time, it was at peace. Lyra opened her eyes, the weight that had once felt so heavy now lifted from her shoulders. She had let go. The power was no longer hers to hold. It was the garden's, and it would remain free. The ground beneath her feet trembled, but this time, it was not in fear. It was in harmony. The garden was shifting, its power settling into its rightful place. The magic was no longer a storm, it was a river, flowing freely, moving through the roots, the trees, the flowers. Everything was as it should be. But Lyra knew that this was just the beginning. The garden's magic would continue to grow, to change, to evolve. It would always be there, a part of the world, a part of her, but it was no longer something she controlled. It was a force that lived and breathed, and it would continue to shape the world as it had done for centuries. She felt a presence behind her, and when she turned, she saw Evelyn. The woman who had once walked these paths, who had cared for the garden long before Lyra had arrived. Her face was serene, her smile gentle. She nodded toward Lyra, as if to say, "You've done it. You've made the right choice." Lyra smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Evelyn had been the garden's first keeper, and now, Lyra was passing the mantle to the garden itself. The magic was no longer bound to one person. It was free, as it should be. "I'm ready," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "I will protect it, but I will not control it. I will let the garden be what it is meant to be." Evelyn's smile deepened. "The garden is not just a place. It is a story, a memory, a living part of the world. And now, it is free to tell its story, to share its magic with those who need it most." Lyra nodded. She understood now. The garden was not a tool for power. It was a sanctuary. It was a living story. And it was her job to protect it, not by holding on to its power, but by ensuring that it remained free to be what it was always meant to be. As Lyra walked away from the stone circle, the wind carried the sound of the chimes, sweet and clear. The garden was at peace, its power flowing freely once more. And for the first time since her journey had begun, Lyra felt the weight of her responsibility lift from her shoulders. The garden had chosen her, but now, it was time for her to choose. She would be its protector, but she would never again be its master. The garden was free, and in that freedom, it had found its true power. And so, Lyra walked into the future, her heart light, knowing that the garden was in the best hands it could be, in the hands of those who understood it, who loved it, and who would always protect it.